And again, it is a great honor to have Dr. Birgit with us today. Birgit is a Jungian analyst of the BJAA with 42 years of clinical experience and a previous training in body-oriented psychotherapy. She served on the BJAA training committee and worked as clinical supervisor at Kingston University. She teaches on Jungian analytic trainings as well as at Birkbeck College. She's an independent scholar and has published numerous papers and book chapters. Her PhD is on sanatology, a clinical paradigm of health and healing. She has lectured internationally on themes such as body and being, forgiveness, spirituality in the consulting room, and on clinical paradigm. So without further ado, I will hand it over to you, Birgit, and take it away.
Yes, thank you. I would like to begin my talk on a personal note and tell you how arts-based research came into my life. When I started on my PhD in 2007, interdisciplinary and arts-based research were not in any way on the map in the way they are today. As a Jungian analyst, I was interested in how, as therapists, we relate to our clients, and how this might be based on more general ideas about the world and about human nature. For this, I explored the typical language and narrative of case histories, something that had not been done in any systematic way before. However, my research design was creative rather than numbers-based. Clinical language emerged as a language of opposition and war, whilst clinical narrative depended on learning through suffering and never rested in positive dynamics or clients' positive capacities. My research showed that Jungian clinical work can be based in a highly anxious and negative view of human nature and the world we live in. This, however, is too similar to the inner landscape of the many people who approach us for help, because they already experience it within themselves. Clearly then, a different outlook for psychotherapy was needed, and I developed the idea of deep positivity. This is a view of the world based in quantum and complexity theories. My PhD embraced empirical science, critical philosophy, via positiva mysticism, and Jungian analysis. In other words, it was interdisciplinary, and I used methods that would now register as arts-based research. For instance, a series of very intense and repetitive dreams that just would not let up almost pulled me, I could say, really pulled me towards conceiving deep positivity. Eventually, this emerged as a domain where complex and implicitly positive dynamics can be shown to be the strongest influence. In ordinary words, this is an outlook of radical hope without overlooking difficulty, and I will unpack this and explain it later. It is only more recently, through my involvement with the London Arts-Based Research Centre, that I realized that I had also developed a complete epistemology for arts-based research. Epistemology is to do with how our knowledge is constituted, how it comes about in principle. These questions are then more fundamental than which methods we use. In that sense, epistemology precedes methodology. Epistemology is about what type of thinking we are supposed to use, and therefore what type of argument is acceptable. It is important to me to point out that this is actually a highly political, really highly political aspect, as not all forms of generating knowledge are usually equally acceptable. And I need to emphasize again that this is not about the methods, but about something much more fundamental, which is usually not discussed and tend to remain hidden. Institutions such as the academy tend to hold norms in this regard, which are linked to implicit value judgments, which then disqualify some ways of gathering knowledge, such as, for instance, intuitive modes of knowing, or bodily means of knowing, or heart-based ways of understanding. I want to explain, or I will explain this in much more detail later. Here, I only want to mention that these examples I just gave all use forms of resonance rather than ordinary logic. They are ways of knowing in rather than knowing of. Thus, we might know something in our guts or in our hearts. It is only when we ask critical epistemological questions, such as, how does this institution expect me to generate knowledge? And what implicit values is this based on? It is only then that the political aspect becomes visible and available for discussion. Critical epistemology, then, is a vital tool for arts-based research. And by and large, what we find, if we look for the epistemological bias in the academy, it is to do with the use of ordinary logic, which is binary. This involves a world of differentiation and opposition. It is also a way of tying things down. The world appears divided into neat parcels that can be fully defined and described. There's also a fundamental division between researcher, subject, and the rest of the world. Using ordinary logic, we are not supposed to be intuitive or to know things before we inquire into them. Also, we are not supposed to argue via simile, as we do when we use poetic language, or when we employ quotation to evoke an idea. Again, argument via simile, that is, elaborating one idea through another, uses resonance. Something in us is touched or chimed off, and this leads to deeper understanding or insight. The implicit bias of institutions tends to exclude resonance-based ways of knowing. The methods and requirements that follow from this bias are, of course, those of empiricism. Importantly, this bias is usually never spelled out, which creates implicit norms that then appear as if they are givens, needing no justification. And so in the academy, for instance, or where in the empirical research is normative, it is just assumed that somehow the world is binary, or reality in itself is binary and can be shown or inquired into by binary methods, because that's just the nature of reality. And that question of what the nature of reality really is it binary, is it something else, is never posed. And so we have these implicit norms, but they have to do with both logic and the nature of reality, but usually they are never discussed. Where was I? It is only when we step out of ordinary logic and its requirements that its normative function becomes clear, and we can then advocate for a broader approach, or what I call epistemological democracy. I believe that anyone who works in the academy knows that equality in the politics of knowing is something that still needs a lot of work. However, we are also collectively and culturally in the process of assimilating quantum science, which gives us a very different type of logic, and this in time is likely to filter through. So very fortuitously, it is currently from within science that an alternative form of logic emerges, and with it comes a profound readjustment of what we hold to be real. Quantum logic opens up a world that is very different and much more complex. This also means that it cannot be fully described in the ordinary way, and that basically ordinary language defies us when we try it. In other words, we are naturally led towards more poetic language, and we can't just use our analytical minds to get to grips with it. In understanding quantum theory, there usually comes a point where our minds get so boggled that our linear logical brains just have to let go. Many people have the experience that when we think we have understood quantum theory, something comes along that just topples the edifice, and we have to start again. I'm not talking about the mathematical quantum formalism, of course. That is never in question. I'm talking about the way our understanding of reality shifts. And here we come to something that is at the heart of my talk, and it's to do with the tiny prefix trans. Quantum logic takes us way beyond the world of binarity, the world of differentiation and opposition, and being able to tie things down. I came up with the idea of trans-binarity about 12 years ago intuitively as part of my work on deep positivity, through what I can only call an intense, very intense inner pull. Of course, at the time, everybody was talking about non-binarity. I then realized that non-binarity simply sets up a fresh pair of opposites. Trans-binarity, however, fundamentally loosens the subject-object divide in every aspect of life, whilst at the same time retaining a capacity for difference. As I have mentioned, ordinary logic cuts up the world into neat parcels. In a trans-binary world, people and things and research subjects, but also time and place, cannot be kept apart in the same way. However, there's also not just one big soup where everything overlaps and eventually becomes identical. Rather, there are complicated webs of interrelations that follow the patterns and dynamics of complexity theory. Trans-binarity is also translinear. Things don't follow from each other in the usual way. Instead, they co-emerge. There's much, much more to this, which I will go on to explain a bit later. Yet perhaps you can already sense how even with this tiny bit of information, the world of arts-based research and arts-based inquiry in the academy shifts as the implicit norms of empirical research no longer hold. We are then freed up to expand our ways of knowing, and this in turn allows a host of different methods. Thus, engaging with quantum logic eventually opens up a vast epistemological landscape, leading to the idea of deep reason. Here, knowledge expands into a living and all-pervasive aspect of the fabric of reality, rather than something generated separately in our minds or our brains only. Knowledge then is something that in principle pervades the entire cosmos. Deep knowing employs what I call resonatory reason, for quantum processes work like an orchestra. It is to do with the wave-like attunement which creates a sense of overlap between the researcher and his or her subject. Resonatory reason is linked to intuition, but not limited to it. It may arise via any or all of Jung's 4 functions: thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuiting. It also involves a concept of time that is translinear. Or in the words of quantum physicist Professor Karen Barrett, I quote, "The future is already here and the past is yet to come." The future is already here and the past is yet to come. In this context, knowing is fluid, all-pervasive, outside as well as inside, and time flexible. It is also intrinsically linked to meaning, purpose, and ultimately love. And I will explain this last bit a little bit later and tell you how that actually comes about or how one can develop it like that. So how does this matter to arts-based research today? In my view, ABR is currently becoming more accepted as a research methodology. As I mentioned, trans-binarity adds to this an epistemology. In other words, it's able to firmly establish the methods used in arts-based research as valid forms of gathering knowledge. And importantly, it is able to do this using contemporary empirical science. Now, of course, I need to back up all these statements and make them more accessible to you. Clearly, in this short space, I cannot go into great detail with quantum and complexity theories, and I would like to point those who want to know more about that to my Psychreative talk on deep positivity 2 years ago. You can Google my name and deep positivity and it will come up. So let me start out with resonatory reason and show how it is a more complex form of knowing rather than a lesser and unscientific one. For this, I need to bring in very briefly, the more recent history of epistemology. When we consider what is accepted as scientific forms of knowing, we can generally trace a development towards more fluidity. In the earliest 20th century, logical positivism reigned, and logical positivism demands 100% of binarity, and this is, of course, the logic of empirical research and ordinary science. Here, only something is fully the case, i.e. 100%, here only if something is fully the case, i.e. 100%, may it be regarded as a fact. So something has to be measured and tied down so that we can say it's 100% the case, as opposed to not the case, and then we can scientifically regard it as a fact. So ordinary logic deals in 100%, and that's what we call logical binarity. This explanatory landscape is conceptually flat, as everything can be reduced to two completely distinct elements, yes or no, fact or falsehood. Of course, ordinary everyday argument works like that as well. Describing it in this way does not mean that we should discard it, though. In a trans-binary world, nothing needs to be stripped of its value or thrown away. Today's quantum logic, however, is trans-binary, and it transcends ordinary thought. Here, things can easily add up to more than 100%. And very importantly, in quantum logic, yes and no positions become less distinct. So we can easily have more than 100%. That already sort of, adds so much fluidity. You have transcended the binary approach, but also, and that's an important aspect, yes, any yes position only ever applies up to 66.66, etc%, whilst any no only ever reaches 33.33, etc%. Thus, we can only ever separate things up to roughly 33%, and a complete 100% distinction is not possible. However, we can reach it if we sort of arrange for it. If we arrange the world in a certain way or experiment in a certain way, we can, of course, reach it, but it's not inbuilt in reality as is usually the view. So 100% distinction is not possible. And this means, for instance, there is always overlap between researcher and research project. And it also means that anything that we regard as a fact in a quantum context is, in terms of ordinary reality, is kind of smeared out. You don't have sort of clear outlines like you have in binarity, where the outlines are they are called cookie cutter outlines. They are like with a cookie cutter, this is it. It's sort of stamped, done and dusted. And in quantum, you have smeared outlines. And you have overlap, of course, between researcher and research project. It points to a profound capacity for connectedness, which leads to intrinsic ways of knowing. If everything sort of connects up, knowledge becomes intrinsic. Quantum logic then forms the epistemological landscape of deep knowing. The modality best suited to this is reason based on resonance. Trans is the operative word here, and it really stretches the mind. It is so much more complex than non-binarity. It means, for instance, that something, if I unpack it a bit more, it means that something is simultaneously both the case, as well as not the case, as well as neither, as well as either, all four. And so if you sort of compare that with ordinary logic, here you can see we can't tie it down. It's simultaneously both the case, not the case, neither, and either. And but however, at the same time as this, what I've just said, things tend to be more the case than not the case. So if we try to perceive or describe the world in this way, we can see that our logical minds just get sort of stretched, and because we can't tie things down in the way that we used to. I always say that with quantum theory, you cannot avoid losing your mind, albeit in the best possible way. As we allow our logical minds to recede, resonance-based modes of knowing emerge. This impacts on the language we use. It then becomes clear that poetic, symbolic, or mystical ways of expressing ourselves are best suited to reality, according to quantum logic and trans-binarity. There is a further really important aspect of quantum logic, and it is to do with the roughly 66% of yes in relation to the roughly 33% of no that I mentioned. If you think about that, this relation, it implies what we might call the principle, although that's just a word that I'm choosing. I don't know what else to call it. So it implies what we might call a principle of such high positivity and connectivity that it clearly outweighs the negative, i.e. the 30% no, keeping it at roughly 33%. However, even though there is an enormous power differential, or what you could call a kind of power differential, the stronger positive force does not obliterate the weaker negative one. In other words, there's no war, rather the stronger force embraces and incorporates the weaker one. Of course, this immediately brings to mind the mystical via positiva, where life is informed by what we might call infinite mercy. In subtle ways, then, a trans-binary world is linked to a mystical and merciful one. Mystics have always used resonatory reason and have typically received knowledge through their bodies, their feelings, their thoughts, and their intuition. The emphasis here is on received rather than constituted knowledge. And as you know, this is often seen as a woolly way of knowing, but I'm showing that it is actually more sophisticated because it is based in higher conceptual complexity. A good example of this type of knowing is Gottfried Heuer's artwork. Gottfried often uses the wings of dead birds in his stone balances, and he usually carries these on his body whilst walking to the place he has chosen, and later he buries the bird in a little ceremony. I remember well one occasion where Gottfried had to let go of a particularly well-used pair of wings, and he said to me, "I feel I have come to know this bird so well, because I have handled these wings, touched them, arranged them, and looked at them so many times. In my heart, I know this bird so well." Here you can see knowing through resonance at work, but also the time flexibility as the bird is no longer alive, yet he becomes intimately known. Mentioning the heart is another important aspect of this type of reason. Research from the American Institute of Heart Math tells us that our hearts send much more information to our brains than vice versa, and that the heart responds to events even before they occur. Thus, perception via the heart is an important ingredient in resonatory reason, and this shines through in Gottfried's comment. We could also say that ordinary reason is reductive, whereas complex reason and resonatory reason is synthetic, bringing together many aspects that tend to enhance each other. Binary thought, which is used in empirical research, then emerges as an elective method of apprehending reality rather than a given. And this sort of ties back to the political aspect that I mentioned before, that sort of in the academy or many institutions, there is this bias towards binarity. And it's only when we have unpacked things to this point that it then becomes clear that in no way is reality, given in binary ways, but we can choose to explore it in that way, or we can choose that way. So it becomes an elective method of apprehending reality and no longer a given. The clarity of this statement brings us epistemological democracy and flow. Equal value is then given to both modes, and they can be selected according to our purpose. And now I need to tell you a bit more about quantum and complexity. I won't go into great detail, but I need a bit more to base the things that I'm saying on. So ordinary reason is supposed to be neutral and directly reflect the world we live in. However, in a quantum and complexity world, there are what could be called compelling implicit inferences, although no causes can be pinpointed. Complexity theory has so-called strange attractors that underlie seeming disorder. It also has complex attractors which always pull towards renewed order at a higher level of organization. It also has bifurcation points where a system divides into aspects that recede into instability, whereas others form new versions of stability. In other words, this is something like radical hope in action, as things never essentially move backwards and are always pulled tide-like towards something more complex, and that is usually something better, although that may not always be obvious. We might say that what is unhelpful or no longer needed eventually or sometimes suddenly recedes, whereas there's always something that moves on and thrives. Of course, nothing actually pulls in the way of ordinary causes, or we can't pinpoint what it is that pulls. Rather, the dynamics I have just described are inferred from studying the repetitive patterns found in living systems. In quantum theory, we have something that is called a superposition, which is a very high degree of resonance at almost unimaginable degrees of precision. Here, everything is completely aligned and works together like an orchestra, performing a beautiful piece of music. And this dynamic underpins all lived life, including our physical bodies. This means that all spheres of life, which we ordinarily conceive as separate, resonate and form and ultimately co-constitute each other. Therefore, the realms of knowing, being, feeling, meaning, purpose, and the spiritual or the divine can no longer be separated from each other. In the words of quantum physicists, Karen Barrett, they intra-flow, intra flow, intra-flow. That is, they inform and constitute each other from within. Essentially, that means that each tiny quantum entity contains the entire cosmos, and yet it is uniquely different from the next one. It also means that each tiny quantum entity only comes into being in relation to all the others, the infinite amount or the infinite number of other quantum entities. So they co-create each other. That and what I've just said, each tiny entity contains the entire cosmos, and yet it does so in its unique way. And that, again, is sort of a vast epistemological landscape. If you imagine that, it goes on into infinity, and you have the connectivity, but you also have the individuality, and so to bring both together, I feel it's a deeply touching and profound vista. It is a complicated relation of intraconnection and difference, which may confuse our logical minds, but can make total sense to our intuition. When we combine Barrett's reading of quantum reality with the complexity influences that I just mentioned, we can see that at a deeper level, all the intra-flowing, INTRI, flowing aspects of life are continually pulled towards ever more complex forms. Another important bit of quantum research is that both time and place experimentally show quantum properties, and that they can turn into each other in a similar way to the time-space continuum in indigenous cultures. So quantum physics and quantum research with regard to time, experiments actually, with regard to time, reconnect us with the time-space continuum of indigenous cultures. Their way of experiencing extended
Birgit, looks like couldn't
inward.
hear you. Oh, there
Sorry.
you are. You're back. Yes, we couldn't hear you for a few seconds.
Oh, where shall I, which
Just
one?
a few words back. Yeah, maybe just repeat the last sentence.
Yeah. So I was saying that quantum research brings us back to the time-space continuum that indigenous cultures have. Their way of experiencing extended and overlapping time-space is validated by quantum research. If we think about a world of timeless time that somehow includes the place we are in, we can perhaps see how inspiring this might be for art-based research, because it's such a different and fluid world, but it is specifically, if you like, geared to the experience of time and space, which can turn into each other. So that opens up creativity no end, I think, or the potential for creativity and creative research no end. And it's also obvious that ordinary reason is not enough to navigate this territory. There is an artist, actually, who I want to mention to you. Her name is Camille Atterback, U-T-T-E-R-B-A-C-K, Camille Atterback, who has created a video installation of timeless time, and she calls it liquid time. It's actually exhibitions, and that she has had, and they are interactive for the visitor, and but you can find it on YouTube as well, so you can have a look. And it is fascinating because you can see how, if you are a viewer of the installation, you can actually interact with a huge video space in front of you of liquid time, and it is like entering a mirror. It's like entering a mirror, and you can still see outlines, you know, of space and persons, but everything kind of morphs into each other, but it is sort of receptive to the viewer, so the viewer can, you know, they can see themselves. So it's a fascinating piece of art, and Camille Atterbach is the name again, and actually, in a sense, it's a way of experiencing aspects of quantum reality. In combination, all the aspects I have mentioned give us the landscape of trans-binarity. Its modes of knowing embrace all variations from ordinary to resonatory. And it is in this domain that arts-based research really thrives. Of course, I've given you a simplified version of describing something that our minds have a hard time to grasp. We are constantly pulled beyond comprehending towards deeper understanding through letting ourselves be touched and moved by what the science hints at, or the wider vistas it opens. And I wanted to find a way of bringing out the implications of the two leading contemporary theories. It's only when we read them together that we can clearly see how profoundly positive, in the sense of hopeful, they are. We are able to say that generally positive dynamics tend to be the stronger ones, yet their influence is implicit and gentle and subtle. It does not compel. This view is at the core of trans-duality. Whilst I've approached it through logic, essentially it reaches beyond that, and if we allow it, profoundly speaks to our hearts. Thus, ordinary science eventually becomes a heartfelt experience, or perhaps induces an education of the heart. One of the most meaningful and important aspects for arts-based research inquiry is the meaningful responsivity I mentioned. We might say that the heart of the universe tends to respond when we pose a question. A meaningful answer is always trying to constellate in response, and we must find ways of both inviting and receiving it. Of course, this brings us to Jung's synchronicity, his idea of meaningful coincidence. In Trans-binarity, Jung's idea is enhanced and revealed as an intrinsic aspect of the fabric of reality. I would like to note that Jung did not have access to quantum logic. That came much later. We know he corresponded with the quantum physicist Pauli, and their exchange was very important for him. But it was never quite possible to derive any of his theories directly from quantum physics, and because Pauli would always somehow limit it or shut it down, this project. Jung's work is deeply holistic, of course, but also, particularly in the contents of his archetypal theory, deeply dualistic as well. What do I mean by this? Jung's archetypes have a capacity to turn from benign to extremely cruel in an instant. And in this, they are Janus-faced and dualistic, and this brings in a pre-modern sensibility. Whilst the pre-modern society that Jung's archetypal world is based in had a more holistic outlook than we do, for instance, the timeless time of indigenous cultures, from today's perspective, they were also quite cruel cultures in ways that tend to offend our sensibilities. My sense is that this aspect of Jung's work, and particularly his central archetype of the self, need to be reconsidered from a trans-binary perspective. In other words, they need to be allowed to catch up with contemporary sensibilities, or we could say they need perhaps to be humanized. And this is important clinically, particularly when we are working with trauma, where people have experienced cumulative trauma. Their significant caregivers have usually behaved just like archetypes, shifting from helpful to extremely destructive in an instant. Thus, the archetypal world is too similar to the inner world of trauma to help with deeper healing. Archetypes can illustrate the experience of trauma, yet healing it also needs imagining and learning the world of safety and calm. Trans-binarity, with its strong tendency towards the benign that I have elaborated, is well suited to constellating healing. Thinking about clinical work organically leads to the final question of my talk. What if we were to regard the practice of psychoanalysis and psychotherapy as forms of arts-based inquiry? In recent years, there has been a lot of effort within my profession to get it in line with empiricism and to find research methods that fit those requirements. However, by using sophisticated RBA epistemology along the lines I have explained, we could re-envisage psychotherapy as a creative endeavor. Within psychoanalytic theory, of course, there are some concepts that go beyond the subject-object divide. Actually, there are quite a few concepts that go beyond the subject-object divide, such as the idea of transference and countertransference, or of parallel process, or a historical case of point is also Jung's Garden Gate diagram, the overlap of conscious and unconscious of both participants in the process. However, the mainstream clinical outlook as such is very deeply binary and oppositional, as is evidenced in the clinical language of case histories. But it's not limited to that, of course. It's sort of clinical discussion. It's teaching, at analytic institutes and so on. So how would we reimagine clinical work as creative arts-based inquiry? My sense is that this could be incredibly inspiring and freeing. Knowledge would be intrinsic to the relational field, but also linked into and harvested from wider universal sources. Shall I repeat, or I saw that my connection was unstable. Knowledge would be intrinsic to the relational field, but also linked into and harvested from wider universal sources. It would be less restricted to knowing of and tying things down. We could feel confident that an inquiry into healing tends to constellate a response, which then has to be invited and harvested. Dialogue between the person we are working with and ourselves might be more like spontaneously writing poetry or making music together, riffing off and inspiring each other. Of course, there needs to be space also for tying things down. People need to understand why they feel as they do, or also connect with any difficult experience they may not have been strong enough to face. Overall, though, an arts-based way of practicing gives much needed fluidity and also a strong link to therapeutic hope and optimism. Thus, our language could be more poetical and sessions like spontaneously writing a poem together. Whilst our roles are complementary, they do not have to be as oppositional as mainstream practice would have it. Therapist and client both have access to the greater knowledge in which we live. There would also be more emphasis on being with and knowing in, which ultimately leads to deeper understanding. Recalling the stronger, merciful principle in trans-binarity, we might say that arts-based psychotherapy is a joint inquiry into healing our hearts. In ending, I would like to go back to my title, Clouds of Knowing. This is, of course, referring to the 15th century anonymous mystic's title, The Cloud of Knowing. In a nutshell, the cloud of unknowing. That's a good slip of the tongue. So the mystic's title is The Cloud of Unknowing, of course. And in a nutshell, the cloud of unknowing means that the divine is yearned for, yet always remains eternally unknowable and hidden from us as through a cloud. It can only be experienced through divine response to our suffering. And in this, the cloud of unknowing expresses a via negativa view and emphasizes the unbridgeable distance of human and the divine. It follows the principle of differentiation that I explained regarding ordinary logic. In trans-binarity, however, divine and human are linked through resonance, and there's the potential for intimate, living knowledge via intraflow. These ways of knowing are cloud-like in their fluidity, in their beauty, in their layeredness, and in their infinite changeability. They are clouds of knowing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Birgit. This was beautiful. It's amazing. I mean, how many things we imagined and reimagined, how clearly you were able to illustrate how the universe is spiritual in nature, how science is also spiritual in nature, and how arts-based psychotherapy is actually a joint inquiry, as you mentioned. So I think that's a wonderful starting point. Although it's the finishing point of your talk, but it's an amazing starting point of everything else that's going to come through. And it's beautiful. It's very positive. It's very promising. And thank you so much for sharing it with us. I've got so many ideas in my head right now, but I would not want to be a selfish host, and I would want to leave the floor to other attendees. We have around 20 minutes of Q&A with Birgit, and after that, lovely co-host Sarah will be taking care of the second half, which is going to be a series of creative presentations. So we have Dr. Gottfried Heuer who will start, and then we have Dorte Aude, and we also have Ray Harrison who will be sharing poems. So please feel free to pop the questions in the chat box. And if you would like to use the virtual hand button so we could see you more clearly, you could also raise your hand on camera, but it depends where you are on our screens. We might be able to see you, we might not be able to see you. So Susan, yes, okay, I see you.
Wow.
Hi, that was a truly wonderful paper, Birgit. And it's just amazing that arts-based research and depth psychology arts-based research is becoming such a rich field, and you've clearly been an amazing pioneer. So have you can we find this work of yours published, and is this something that perhaps you could say something about how it changes clinical work, because that's something that that is not my area of understanding. So how does your wonderful depth of knowledge here change how you work with clients?
Yeah, that was what I was trying to explore at the end. And I'm in a sense, I mean, my PhD is sort of in this direction with thanatology, and I mean, what is published is in my PhD, so I haven't, and in some papers as well, actually. but yeah, I mean, the main thing I think is, is that sense of responsivity, if you like, from the universe, or the pool of knowledge that we live in, and so that whenever we inquire, we can expect there to be a response. We cannot enforce the response. We cannot know how it comes, but we can expect it. So then, if I hold that view, I always have hope for development. And even if the development is incremental, or seems, to ordinary reason, seems very, very slow, with this attitude, you can still make out a development, and you can put it to people, the development that is there, because that's what what people don't see. We all have been educated more to look analytically and linearly. Then you might miss it if you look only linearly. And we've all been educated to be sort of very self-critical, and not to. So it's in education into realistic hope, and a realistic positive, not sort of rose-tinted glasses, which is how it's easily misunderstood.
Yeah, I see two things there, and one is an understanding of your theme of hope, that for the client, if the client can see development, that is a very hopeful thing for people. But also there's a kind of context here that is quite revolutionary in suggesting that a lot of what troubles people that they bring to analysis, which is often considered to be pathological, isn't. It isn't. It's just part of the field that wants to emerge at this time.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, that's potentially a real revolutionary change that could be very exciting.
Yeah. It's about an acceptance of what there is. However, where the person is suffering, they're seeking change. But that change is sort of, you could say, I mean, I'm including everything, not just psychotherapy. That change is to do with somehow with an education of the heart. That the heart grows, or the heart becomes more flexible, or in that sense, sort of the heart becomes more quantum and complexity.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Susan and Birgit. I especially love the idea of the education of the heart. And it also makes a link to Susan's book on Jungian art-space research in the chapter where you speak about Nicolescu and Jung. And when you also mention that knowledge needs to be linked with, I mean, it's not just knowledge making, but through art-space research, it's also meaning making. And this resonates with Birgit when she says that this is the knowledge of the heart. And you also mentioned in your talk, Birgit, how we are more inclined to understand things poetically, how we are able to grasp things in the heart before the brain, or more than the brain. So yeah, we're hoping for this new acknowledgement, or the shift in acknowledging how knowledge works and how meaning making also takes its turn. So thank you so much. And I also see Helen Jameson.
Yeah, I should apologize. I'm Trevor Jameson. I'm using my partner's Zoom. Birgit, hi. Following on from Susan's question, a bit more about clinical training. I'm very aware, and looking at, as you would have done, the syllabus for the BJA 4-year training, there's an awful lot which to me implies it's all about knowing. And I think that I'd be really interested to hear your comments on how we might bring about some change in that perspective.
Yeah. I think by sort of considering the aspects that I've mentioned, and also by introducing critical epistemology because there isn't, at the moment, I think, in clinical training, it's not just ours, there isn't an awareness of our bias towards, ordinary reason. And even though our subject matter is the human being, and we still have this bias towards tying things down, making things definite, and that's sort of in the way that things are taught. Clinical work is taught in that mainstream way, and I think it's just by engaging with these ideas that eventually it will shift. And I have the experience that people who because I teach at Birgit, people who do the courses there, they when they move on to clinical training are shocked at how this translates, the ideas that are so much more in Jung, but how that translates into, in a sense, how the practice of analysis is taught. So I just feel we have to sort of engage much more. Our trainings have to engage much more with these ideas.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
And you.
Thank you very much. And would anyone else like to go for a question right now? James, yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. Okay.
You're muted. You're still muted.
Muted.
Can't hear you.
Muted.
There we go.
Yeah.
I just wanted to share, first of all, a play. I first heard you speaking of trans-binarity rather than trans, which I thought was sweet in the context that you were speaking of. And I sort of, as you know, I hugely appreciate what you've done, which is enormous deepening and validation of good work, and rather than seeing it as a revolution in psychotherapy practice, it seems to me that it's a really good description of good practice and bad practice in a way.
Yes, you could say that.
So that the best of Jungian practice is about understanding feelings and dreams as forms of thought and teaching people how to read. So it is educative, but it is in that matrix, and the whole sort of concept of the analyst being in the alchemical bath with the client. So it seems to me that you just what you've given us is a wonderful deepening of our practice.
Yes, I mean, it's all in Jung, as you say. That's all in Jung, of course. But I'm kind of like Trevor said, Trevor Jameson just said, in our trainings there is such a thing as a mainstream paradigm, and in our trainings this is not enough reflected. But I agree, your point about creative and good practice. Yes.
Well, Winnicott hit the nail on the head a long time ago when he said training is for dogs. And when I created the Jungian training in Birmingham, I made a plea for calling it an education. And it fell on completely deaf ears.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I mean, that's my point in a way.
Yeah.
Thank you, James, for the question, and thank you, Birgit. Who's next? Linda.
Hi, Birgit. Thank you so much. I found that really stimulating. I just wanted to make a comment, though. When I was training at Asia, I felt nothing was tied down, nothing was definite, nothing was clear. And as a raw trainee, I found myself almost drowning in a sea of archetypes and dream interpretations that couldn't be definite, and Jung's obscure language and everything. And then gradually I realized, that was the point, that you can't tie things down and you can't be definite. So although I recognize what you're saying about this binary way of thinking and logical positivism in the wider world, I don't recognize it in my own training, which wasn't like that from my experience.
Yeah, well, good on you. You had a different experience.
Well, that's because Gottfried was involved, you see.
Yeah. So you are saying you needed, you had a hunger for things to be clearer, but it was a struggle.
Yes. I remember one week, for one weekend, we were told, read the whole of Symbols of Transformation. And I remember plowing through all this stuff, I'm thinking, what on earth does this mean? How on earth can I make sense of this, retain this? So a lot of the early parts of the training was an experience of, I can't sort this out with my rational mind. And someone gave me a little piece of advice and said, just let it flow over you, just try and absorb whatever sticks, kind of thing, and don't worry about making sense out of it.
Yes, yeah. Yes, so you had a different experience, but I mean, in terms of what I'm saying, in terms of making things definite, or the difference I'm making of between knowing of and knowing in, I think still applies to clinical work. Not when we read Jung, of course, because Jung is not like that and doesn't write like that. Luckily so, I would say, but when it comes to clinical work and how it's taught, there are ways in which there is an expectation that we can always tie things down to some extent, and in the sense of knowing of rather than knowing in. Knowing of means I know the object or I can describe things, and I think there is that tendency, but perhaps it wasn't that much your experience.
No, I don't think it was, actually, because I remembered really leaping on this quote from Jung with great delight when I was told, oh, well, when somebody brought Jung a dream, one of the typical things he would say is, I have no idea what this dream means. That was his first response. And I thought, well, if Jung said that, I'm okay here. I'm in safe ground.
Yes, yeah.
That was very interesting. Thank you, Linda. Anyone else would like to jump in? Last chance. Yes, Ray.
You can hear me.
Yeah.
I loved your talk 2 years ago, and I loved the talk today as well. And I'm not a clinical psychotherapist. I'm a writer and independent scholar, but it's always been interesting to me that Jung himself didn't include imagination in his quaternity. And I've been thinking about that for a long time. And you mentioned Native American or traditional cultures and the way they look at things, and bringing that back. The past will be the future, and epistemological equality, which certainly we don't have in the academy. It's all about thinking. It's all about one thing alone, seemingly. So the Native Americans had, I read something once, I don't know whether it was a folk tale or what it was, but the Native Americans had an understanding of 7 directions. Now, usually when you talk to people about directions, it's 4 directions: north, south, east, and west. And that goes right along with Jung's quaternity, that he was thinking also in 4 directions. And we live on a flat earth, and a map is a flat A map is a reduction of the actual landscape. But the Native Americans thought in terms of 7 directions: north, south, east, west, above, below, and then fantastically within. The center was a direction for Native Americans. So in my own thinking, I said, Jung wanted to be accepted as a scientist, so he kept the imagination out of his quaternity, perhaps. But I've got to put it back in. So when I think of space, space has 3 axes to it. Okay, and if you look at each axis as a polarity of positive and negative, that like a magnet. The obvious one is thinking and sensation, and we reduce that. That's the binary thinking, and then we reduce everything down to just thinking. That's the reduction that science makes. Okay, but if you're going to have epistemological equality, you're going to have to include all the directions that make up space, because if you go into the Eastern way of looking at things, if space has 3 axes and 6 different directions, consciousness should have it also. So when I think about Jung's quaternity, and you talked about we have to revision some of the things that Jung came up with, I think of thinking and sensation on one axis. I think of intuition and imagination on another axis. And I think of feeling and remembrance on a third. And those 6 things seem to me to be epistemological equality. You have to deal with not just the thinking, but you have to deal with intuition, imagination, which seemingly is arts-based research, is seemingly based upon imagination, sensation. There's a great book called The Body Keeps the Score about psychotherapy and that we trap our past trauma in the body. And then feeling and remembrance as well. And of course, their thinking is the reduction. We take 6 directions and we turn it into the one. So the talk for me is very enlightening and freeing, the idea of epistemological equality, that knowing really has to go into all these other areas. And that seems to me what you're suggesting.
Yes, thank you. I mean, you can take what I said and expand on it in the way that you have, and that's an interesting way of adding to what's already there, or sort of making it more complex. I think what you've added sort of makes the outlook more complex. So it's the opposite of reducing; it adds more. And if we sort of follow complexity theory, or the sort of the dictums of complexity theories, that's the way reason goes. It sort of becomes ever more complex.
Absolutely.
And yes.
And the one thing I forgot to mention is that the 7th direction. So you have intuition, imagination, sensation, thinking, feeling, and remembrance. But what is the center? Well, I would say the center is creativity. And I think that creativity brings all those 6 things together. That in every creative act, you have 6 things that are happening. So you also said something that's very interesting. It's not limiting at all, because the center is within each one of us. Each individual has this center of creativity, then the possibilities are endless. It's very opening and freeing, and that's just a wonderful thought. It's not limiting at all.
Yeah. That thought, I mean, in ending perhaps with this discussion, I think that thought was sort of incredibly evocative for me as well. That sort of each entity, or you could say each individual in some ways, because we're made up of quantum entities, has the entire universe within, yet it only comes into being through everybody else, all the other entities. And, whilst having the entire universe within themselves, each sort of particle has it in its unique way. And I think that's mind-blowing and profoundly touching as well, to see the world in that way.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ray, for sharing and those wonderful ideas and for recommending the book. I just put it here in the chat box. And well, before we move, we could take one more question. And I see Sharon has had her hand up for a while. So Sharon, you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Great talk. I'm writing my dissertation on mysticism and archetypal wholeness. And I think there was one point in the lecture today that you were grasping for a word, and you were using maybe relational. And the two characters that are in my dissertation is Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century medieval mystic, and Black Elk, which is a First Nation Lakota Sioux mystic. And so I want to connect that to kind of go back to Jung and give him credit that during his hospital, after his heart attack, he had a vision where he said he felt a connection to all that there was or is. And that was that wholeness that, there's no, the fields are not binary, they're very interconnected. And kinship is a word that the First Nation people use a lot. The book Braiding Sweetgrass exemplifies that. And the man that was just talking about the 7 directions, the center is, for the Lakota Sioux at least, is the axis mundi. Everything radiates out from there, and it's a way in I call it a method, mundus imaginalis, that you connect from above, below, heaven and earth and below, and then radiate out to all those other directions, which brings that notion or metaphor of kinship, it's trans-binary. And it's fascinating. It ties back to Jung and that experience, and him also investigating mundus imaginalis, synchronicity. He wasn't, quantum physics was on the horizon when he had his heart attack, so he wasn't privy to it, but he intuited it, especially in his deeper conversations with Wolfgang Pauli. So I want to just throw out there that
Lost her.
Can't hear you, Sharon.
We've lost her.
Yeah, we can't hear you. I don't know if you can hear us. Maybe it's the phone. Maybe you're sitting in a no network area or something. Okay, you're trying again, but we still can't hear you. Yeah, I can't hear you. So we want to thank you again, Sharon, for sharing your views also with us and your experience. We will move now with Sarah to the next part of the session, before finally ending with the lucky draw. Our lucky winner will get the chance to attend one of our future conferences for free. We're not talking about Psychreative or Indelible Evenings, but we're talking about either Science and Sensibility, which is coming up this weekend, or Psyche and Symbol, which is on the 14th of October, or the Alchemy Conference, which will take place at Oxford University on the 4th and 5th of November. And our keynote speaker will be Susan Rowland, who will be with us in person. And we also have Lisa Oz joining us as our guest speaker. So you get to choose whichever one you want. Just drop me a line and tell me, hey, book a place for me for this conference, and congratulations in advance. But before that, let's hear the poetry and the other presentations coming up. So Sarah, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yeah, great.
I'd just like to say goodbye, and I've really appreciated the talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here. Thank you. Good night.
All right, so thank you so much, Birgit. It was amazing. Just so many incredibly thought-provoking concepts, and I can't wait to hear where it goes in the second half. We have Gottfried up first, which is so great to hear from him after you referenced some of his work in your talk. And I feel like we're gonna move even more into that art space here with all this poetry and creativity. So Gottfried, whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Yes, I do feel quite a powerful connection to, of course, to Birgit's talk. I'm going to speak about the presence of creation from my poem's conception to its birth. And I'm going to present this poem, yet before that, I shall share of my experiences of how it came about, in a way, how we came upon each other, how we met, the poem and I. I asked myself about its source. Where does my inspiration come from? The term itself comes from the Latin to breathe into. Yet where does that come from? And who does the breathing? In German language, there is the term Einfall, literally infall, for what enters seemingly out of nowhere conscious awareness. The painter Francis Bacon spoke of images just drop in my mind like slides. And writers speak about characters they have ostensibly created, seemingly acquiring a life of their own, arguing with their author and even steering the events of the story as it unrolls. In the beginning, for me, there was the word, one that suddenly gripped and shook me, when almost as an aside, someone mentioned the recent killing of a white stag that had appeared in a small town. Immediately, this put a lump into my throat. I felt a crying arising from my heart. And I've come to realize this in myself as indicating the presence of the holy. It thus was for me, as Walter Benjamin might say, a messianic moment, meaning that in every moment the Messiah may appear. This became the core of my poem, and I later found this image on the internet of the white stag in the small town. Since time immemorial, some wise have maintained that we are not actually living, but that we are being lived. I experienced my deep emotion associating itself to the memory of a play I'd seen some years before. That drama imagined the reappearance of Christ and how we would react to that. This became part one of my poem. These two then, as if with a life all of their own, linked themselves to a dream I'd had a few weeks earlier, a dream so vivid that awakening, I needed some time to regain consciousness. This dream carried an unexpected political dimension. I had had this dream under the previous prime minister, and my dream seemed to be speaking to that situation. But now, with the current prime minister's threat to send refugees to Rwanda, something that even the Archbishop of Canterbury calls morally unacceptable, the poem can also be understood as specifically referring to that outrage. Part 3. I photographed a man recently who was protesting against that with a t-shirt that says, "Visit Rwanda." What I had written seemed to speak back to me with a voice I could not recognize as consciously my own. Rather like from an alive being that responded to both the changing collective as well as my personal situation. My dream included Bach's cantatas. I had vaguely known that he had composed some, but I had never ever listened to one. It felt as if the poem wrote itself. In the final part 4, I found words to that voice and listened to it speaking to me about the meaning of it all for me. I have in this context thought of an only vaguely remembered concept from what I believe to be an Eastern spiritual context, according to which, as far as music is concerned, it is assumed that the melodies are all around us in the ether, and that musical instruments are just used to capture these. Correspondingly, we might conceive of words and images similarly swirling about us, in which case we are the instruments ourselves. Almost 100 years ago, Rainer Maria Rilke wrote, quote, "We are the bees of the invisible. We collect the honey of the visible to gather it in the great golden hive of the invisible." Yet beyond what I had intended, what I had written seemed to continue its independent existence as I experienced a momentous synchronistic event. That lump again in my throat, the luminosity felt like an affirmation of what I had expressed. Another stag, and this one I could ensure to continue to live. I wrote about this in a coda. I could not but fall onto my knees in prayer to give thanks to the divine. Is this what shamans, holy men, and prophets mean when they say, "God spoke to me"? The Bhagavad Gita, some 2,500 years ago, says, "The spirit that is in all beings is immortal in them all. Thus the death of that which cannot die does not need to distress you." And now here's my poem, Star of Redemption. Resurrection Blues is almost Arthur Miller's final play. He worked on it right up until his death. It centers on a man who has been taken prisoner, and his appearance may or may not be the second coming of our Lord. Oh, I am quite sure the Jewish writer did not mean the Christ of the Christian church, and nor do I. The ruler of the unnamed country is preparing a second crucifixion. in order to protect the public. Almost exactly mirroring the subject of the play, a review of its London run then concluded, nothing was so disastrous as the debacle surrounding Resurrection Blues. After horrendous reviews, the play was forced to close a week earlier than planned. Whereas I had experienced the play as maybe the most deeply moving I had ever seen on stage, raising the question, what would actually happen if the Messiah did come again today into this, our world? Would I be able then to welcome him? The almost presence of the holy sent shivers down my spine. It was as if an angel had passed by and touched me with its wings. 2 years ago, autumn equinox, a rare white stag appeared in full daylight in Bootle, Merseyside, near Liverpool. Do you remember? All you need is love, love, love. Roaming the town's very center for nearly one whole day. Hearing of this moved me close to tears, put a lump into my throat, and again there was that angel touching me as if with the tip of its wing, the presence of the holy. In the end, against advice from the RSPCA to leave the deer as it would make its own way home, the deer was killed by the police. To protect the public, a senior policeman said, adding that he was proud of the officers involved. 3. About a month before the murder, I had a dream, a particularly vivid one. I am high up on an indoor balcony of a light, wide and serene hall, white walls with golden ornaments. Looking down with others, I can see UK's Prime Minister surrounded by his faithfuls, facing a small crowd and open for questions from the public. He does not fare well in this. I almost feel some pity. He just cannot handle the questions posed to him. Then I see a friend of mine calling to him from the back, saying it would be so good if at least you listened to a Bach cantata. Rejoice, redeemed crowd. I've actually got one here with me, and from one person to the next, he passes on a tiny music player until it reaches the head of state. And he refuses the pure and holy music. Nearby, the people try to persuade him, but to no avail. He is adamant, yet does become uncertain, shifty, and retreats on shaky legs. The crowd, a while restless, first in low murmur, then loud and ever louder, is shouting, out, out, out! I, in the meantime, go downstairs to find my friend where we embrace, and I congratulate him. 4. What would it really do to me? How would I react if Christ really were to come a second time? And you? Dare we together hope to give birth to him a second time, resurrecting the divine? Or what if Arthur Miller's play wants me, us, to realize that there only truly is one single prison guard, and that it's up to me, to all of us, to either crucify him or to set him free, and to realize that ours is the only flesh that we can hurt. Of course, today the holy just as likely may be a woman or a girl or a refugee, someone of color. A while ago, rehearsing a nativity play in a preschool near where I live, the small children had wanted the Christ child to be represented by a brown doll. Just breathe and take that in. Sadly, the teachers vetoed this. What if the white stag wanted me to know I am here all the time? In fact, I have never been away. Is what my dream is telling me, as Bach in his cantatas jubilates, arise in joy, I know where my Redeemer lives. That we all shall know that darkness gives way to light, and that in each and every messianic moment, the longed for divine can be and is right here now. Coda. Just the other week, in the park close to my home, I did indeed meet a stag. A stag beetle, that is, brown. His appearance shook me. Never ever in my life had this happened to me. Another one I did meet many years ago on a busy city street died in my hand before I could carry him to safety. But this one climbed onto the hand I held out, did allow me to find a place for him to securely live his life, and leaving me in tears of gratitude. Just as he said, turn over any stone and you shall find me there. Amen. Thank you.
Wow.
Beautiful. Thank you, Gottfried. Give you a applause here.
Thank you very much.
Gottfried, is there a specific Bach cantata that you're referring to?
Just the few titles that I have mentioned.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I love how you described how you and the poem came across one another, and then to see how that relationship sort of evolves throughout. It's really beautiful.
Yeah, I was thinking of Birgit's use of the word resonance. It was really, it felt like a mutual relationship. That's why I said initially, this is how we came upon each other. Not I wrote a poem, but we happened to each other. We found each other.
Yes.
That's the big bang of the poem. It's amazing. Thank you, Gottfried.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. All right, and now we have Dorte.
Yeah, hello.
Hello.
I'm Dorte Olle. I'm from Denmark. I'm a Jungian analyst, and I'm going to read a poem for you here. And like you said, you met your poem, and I met an image in a dream, and that was Yayoi. So now here it comes. Lola meets Yayoi. Lola is aiming high, looking upwards towards the sky, up, up, up. Her lips are singing, always higher up, touching the sky. Look, she has plumages along her arms and Hermes wings on her boots, taking her up, up and away. Lola is a free bird, melodies in the heights, traveling. She donates everything for nothing, absolutely nothing. In her sunflower seed rucksack, Lola is ready to fail, ready to remain innocent about dangers, risks, not wanting to be aware, pricks her fingers on the thorns of the white rose, the things she doesn't want to know. Lola doesn't care being Humpty Dumpty. Lola thinks she can return on her wings up, up, up. Under her feet, the white rabbit hole, and Alice. Go ask Mother Goose, she will know. Feed your head, the dormouse said, and Lola is dragged by her long blonde ponytail, dragged, dragged, dragged into the rabbit hole, all the way down a tunnel of soil, down, down, down. Lola screams, but no one listens. No one is dragging her. She is pulled by forces no one knows. Down under she meets Yayoi, a 200 years old woman, Zen master. Her painted pearly skin covers her wrinkles. She opens and closes her eyes, bright, youngish, alligator sparkling. Sticking out her long lava tongue, Lola screams and puts her arms up, 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 but nothing happens. No elevator or escalator, nothing takes her away. Left in the rabbit hole alone, Yayoi takes her hand, invites her to sit, looks into her eyes wide open. You and me, Yayoi says, we are here together. Put your hand in mine, whatever it takes. I will stay here with you. We can build this dream together, standing strong forever. Between a Bruno Cerulata and bonsai 800 years old, Yayoi is magically making emerald green matcha, tea for two, the chastened whipping, wave foams. She has taken off her mask, twinkling one spring green eye, inviting Lola in on a tatami mat, holding the ceremony for two. Lola doesn't know Japan. Lola is not afraid of Japan. She's wandering around in Tokyo alone, Shibuya without money. Suddenly, Lola's face becomes evergreen, thunder in her breast, birds in her brain, her intestines full of perfectly formed long shit she is. Without words, her body is shouting, I'm here, listen to me. Down, 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 a big fat cobra coiling up in her body, round and round and round, a thick rope on the dock for the ferry, taking all the space inside and amongst liver, heart, lungs, uterus, bladder, her organs constipated, the long, dry, fat, scaly body. The snake is slow, running like oil. Dark, suddenly now, a white rabbit stops, looks at all the darkness, the sneakness, surprised. Rapidly, Yayoi uses her lion, bringing up the snake, sticks her hand down into Lola, brings up the head of the snake in her hand, holding firmly its mouth, the sharp teeth, the bifocal cherry-colored tongue sticking out, pulls and pulls and pulls the snake up, 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 coiling up on the floor. Lola falling to the ground like an empty doll, trumpets and daffodils flowing out of her mouth, chanting with the angels, her hair full of snakes. Yayoi kisses them. Kisses, kisses, kisses. All the snakes, they disappear. And Lola herself becomes a snake, a slender, unpredictable, fuck you, cobra, full of lust. Yayoi is busy driving her car up, up, up into Kiso Mountains, Hita Takayama, 7 grandchildren begging for hugs and gifts, jumping around, greeting her. Obasan, 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 eating rice and ramen and noodles with her family, listening to the bluebirds singing. But Yayoi is busy. She jumps into her car, fire on all sides, grandchildren full of tears. She puts her foot on the pedal, gasses up the yellow car faster than light down the mountain. Yayoi, the Zen master, teaching Zen in Teruyui, Kyoto, sticking out her bloody tongue, sparkling emerald eyes, ready for teaching Lola, the innocent girl, Zen meditation, teaching her the way of the underworld. Silently they sit and sit and sit, day after day. Lola is reminded the betrayal of her father. It is there inside her heart, insisting on revenge, but she will not travel to the other side, to the underworld. She will remain in Tenryuchi, but she does not decide. She is dragged to the other side, to the travel of the sun, The horizon of the west calls her into the night, leaving the day behind. Lola screams, putting her hands up, screaming to the sky, feeling so alone. Yayoi is helping Lola, traveling through the water of Osiris, helping her to weep, weep and weep and weep, swimming in the ice-cold water of Osiris, helping her to move on into the desert. Hot, hot, hot sand. Lola is walking on the dark path, not prepared. Lola finds a lake of fire burning. She surrenders, dies, seeing all the suffering of the world. Anubis helps her, finding her missing soul in her heart. Under the silver moon, Lola and Tot, writing, writing, writing is all she does. Jesus died for somebody's sin, but not mine. My sins, my own, they belong to me. Me, Lola sings, writing. She moves in this atmosphere where anything's allowed, and Capri rolls and rolls and rolls, her shit ball full of eggs, and Yayoi is sticking out her bloody tongue, laughing, laughing, laughing. So that's it.
Wonderful. I really felt like I could feel the dreaminess of it and all the archetypal images and all the story tales and everything was woven together so beautifully and complexly. It was just a wonderful journey. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a gorgeous poem, Dorta.
Yeah.
And I keep wondering whether you're related to Hans Christian Andersen. You're from the same town, I believe. Looks like he wrote this poem.
Yeah,
Amazing. The whole fairy tale setting and the morphing of images and settings and all that. It's just amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you. And next we have Ray. Are you ready, Ray?
I'm ready.
All right.
I usually follow Robert Frost in trying to say nothing before or after I read a poem, but I was very gratified to hear Godfrey talk about his inspiration. And I had, just by synchronicity, I already planned to just talk just a little bit, just a tiny bit about writing poems. If I had to sit in a room with a piece of paper, I don't know whether I'd get too many poems done, but a lot of my poems come from my reading. So the first poem I'm going to read came from reading a brand new book by David Hinton called The Way of Chan, which is, he's probably the best translator of original Chinese Chan writing that we have. He's published many, many books. And I actually started writing this poem in the borders of the margins of the book. And that happens to me often. And so the title of the poem is Enlightenment, No Religion, but I just wanted you to understand that I'm a lover of all spiritual traditions. And I came upon this in reading this book. We are each in our own original nature Buddha, a concept stripped in Chan of all religious significance. Hence, we are each always already awakened. And he says, conventional Indian Buddhism functioned largely as a religion, but Chan had no patience with that. It is instead a tradition of philosophers working out a lived philosophy. So that's my introduction to where those two things got me started on thinking about this. And the other thing I've been experimenting with is I had a teacher who always said, you know, you should think of the title of a poem as another line in the poem rather than just like a summary statement. And that stuck with me, and I always try to do that. And lately I've been doing a title of the poem and I don't know what you would call it, a title at the end of a poem, a line at the end of a poem as well. Sometimes it's the same one as at the beginning. Sometimes it differs a little bit, but in the first poem, it's one line, title is one line. In the second poem that I'm going to read, the title is actually a couplet. It's 2 lines at the beginning and 2 lines at the end, but it's all part of the poem. Enlightenment, no religion. You are yourself always Buddha, already before you were born, already before you will die, all ready for what life will bring. When you cried and drew your first breath, your lungs billowed with transcendence, not from the warm nursery air, but from the winds of consciousness. You could not be here now without taking everything within. Yet you have forgotten this truth. Believe you create your own self. Be humble before the cosmos. Be grateful for the vast forests. Learn to migrate like hummingbirds toward nourishment for yourself. Make a pilgrimage to the sea. Listen to the breath of the wind. You are a single grain of sand washed by waves of eternity. Do not forget the miracle of presence, of just being here on this shoreline between one life and another, wave upon wave, no religion. So that's the first poem. The second one comes about from reading Stanislav Grof, The Cosmic Game, which it's funny how I think that these two poems have a lot to do with Birgit's presentation today and talk. And I was reading in his book, Nothing Short of the Experience of Mystical Unity with the Divine Source Will Quench Our Deepest Longing. And to back that up, he actually says, poetry seems to be a more adequate and appropriate means for conveying the essence of spiritual experiences and for communicating about transcendental reality. So that backs up the whole premise about art-based research as well. So this poem has a couplet to begin and a couplet at the end. Always, never ending, always, the coming in, the going out. Your photograph appears within a tray of aqueous magic. As life emerges from the sea, you dawn from the deep of the womb. Yet our universe springs not from an ocean, a womb, or a tray, but from that singularity that will take you out of this life. Just as you came into this room from somewhere else to read these words, just as you came into this poem, everything comes from elsewhere. Your hands push aside the warm sheets as you leave the magic of sleep. You toss aside all your regrets as you slip into this stanza. Can you see yourself develop in the surfaces of mirrors? Are you frozen in a false frame beneath glass, not held by the wind? When you read the final couplet, you must leave all these dreams behind. You must close your eyes and drift off. Anyone you know will vanish. Yet you will remain with yourself. Long after your photograph fades, long after this poem has ended, you will remember this reading. These lines will remain literal, crashing in the conch of your ear as you walk along that shoreline where the mystery is hidden. Inside that silence when you wake, inside that silence where the dream ends and the beating of your heart stops, somehow you are still present. back in that place before the poem, before this room, this day, this life, you have always been with yourself. Now, then, before, after, always. The rain is falling from nowhere into the brooks, ponds, rivers, seas. Suddenly, from everywhere, rain is falling upon your face. From the night of the last stanza, you fall back into your morning. From this photograph of yourself, once again, you enter the womb, always leaving and arriving, the clouds, the rain, the day, your breath. The sea is always calling you home. You are always home. The coming in, the going out, always, never ending, always. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Ray. That was beautiful.
Thank
It's
you.
again, I can see all these poems sort of weaving together, and to see them all, how they connected to each of you and how you found each
Amazing.
other.
Well, the clouds, you know, the Bridges talk today, the clouds. It's just incredible. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Sarah, for taking care of everybody. I guess we can close the session now, but before we do that, we want to make sure not to miss out on the giveaway. So as we said, the winner tonight or today will get the chance to attend one of our conferences, either online or in person for free. But please note, when I mean either online or in person, I don't mean airfare ticket and everything. No, I just mean the ticket to the conference. So we unfortunately cannot pay for any flights or trips or anything of that sort, but we would love to have you with us on any of our great conferences that are coming up. And if you'd like to submit your proposals, the proposal window is still open for the Alchemy Conference up until the 30th of September. So we still have time. You have around 10 days or 11 days. So please feel free to do so. It's going to be an amazing conference, whether you make it in person or online. It's just great. We've received so many fantastic abstracts from great people all around the world. And I think it's just a great opportunity to share our takes on alchemy, what it is, how we use it, and the transformation that it creates, and the metaphors that it stands for. Okay, so these are the names over here. I tried copying in as many names as possible. Now, one thing about it, the winner has to be in the audience right now. So it has to be one of you guys. It can't be anybody that left or that had to leave or that couldn't make it for any reason. So let's see. If it turns out to be someone who isn't here, then we need to repeat it until we get somebody who's here. Right. So where is that? Pick a winner at random. Gottfried! Yay! But Gottfried is already on the indelible team. So technically, Gottfried, I mean, you know, you're the LABRC. So basically, no need to invite you for anything. So we're going to try again. Right, pick another name. Fan. Is Fan here? I don't see any fans, so let's try again. Is James here?
James has left.
James has left. Oh, okay. Anania? Right. You know what we'll do now? We'll just take out the names of those who aren't here. That would be easier. So this reminds me of when I used to teach at school and take attendance and see who's here and who's not. So Anania isn't here. Catherine, is there a Catherine in the house? No. Corby, no. Gottfried, no. Eldad? Eldad here, nope. Okay, Heather. Yamini, is Yamini here? Fan isn't here. Helen? Nope. James slept. Okay, Jobaloo? Is Jobaloo here? Oh, Yamini is here. Right, I see her. Or him, sorry. Jobaloo is here as well. Jochin, I see Jochin. Jonathan? Is there Jonathan here? No, I don't see any Jonathans. Linda? Linda, are you here? No. Okay, so if I take anyone out from the list mistakenly, please let me know. Just scream out, I'm here. Malgarzada? Nope. Nikhil? Pernilla? Philip? I see Philip. I see Ray. Sadie? And Sharon isn't here. Susan had to leave. And Vic also had to leave. Okay. So Yamini, Jobaloo, Joshin, Philip, Raymond. Is there anyone who's here but whose name isn't? Oh, Catherine. All right. Sorry, Catherine. Anybody else?
Daughter, I'm here.
Why is your name on the not on the list?
I don't know.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. So let's do this again. And Jochin is our lucky winner. Congratulations. Congratulations.
Jochen
I don't know
is
if I'm
our lucky
mispronouncing
winner.
your name. I'm sorry if I am. But congratulations. So please drop us a line. Just tell me, hey, I'm the winner. Let me know what to do next. This is the conference that I'd like to attend, whether it's online or in person, and then we can have your name on the list of attendees. So whenever, I mean, it doesn't have to be now, just whenever you feel like it, let me know. So thank you once again, everyone. Birgit, Gottfried, Dorta, Ray, and Sarah, who had to leave us again because she had something else to do a few minutes ago. Thank you all so much for making this happen. This has been a wonderful, wonderful session. So informative, so heartwarming. You know, the connection and the vibes. I just love it when we all get together like this. And we're looking forward to our next Psychreative session. And well, within a week's time, we should be able to confirm the speaker for October, and we will let you know. Of course, you'll be receiving our emails. So if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe to our notifications. And again, feel free to follow us on Facebook, on Instagram, and on Twitter if you have social media. If not, then you could probably just subscribe via email, and that should be enough to hear all about our news and updates. So thank you again, and we all look forward to seeing you very soon. Have a good evening or a good day.
Thank you for giving us this opportunity. Thank you. Bless you.
Thank you all. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.